right, guys, so I had a really good reading month in June, and I thought I would share with you today some of the books that I read. So I finished 12 books in June. A couple of them, I can't remember if I finished at the end of May or the beginning of June, but we'll just go with it. So these are the books I read. I read The Island of Sea Women. This was about a group of women on an island, I think near Korea. And the culture of this island is a little different because the women are the ones who kind of support the family with diving, like deep sea diving, to catch marine creatures to sell and eat and such. So it's just a really interesting kind of little known culture. And the book was based off of that island. So I thought it was really interesting. I learned a lot about the people there. Definitely some cringy things in it. I always write more detailed reviews on Goodreads, so if you're curious about what I thought was cringy, you can go read my full review there. Overall, it was okay. It was, I don't know, some of the cringiness kind of took away from it for me, but it was interesting to learn about the culture. I do wish they hadn't included quite so much details of some of their religious rituals, because a lot of it involved kind of like a shaman and occultish kind of rituals, and I didn't really like reading about that. The next one I read was The Accidental Beauty Queen. This is by Teri Wilson, and I really enjoyed this one. It was kind of like a good chick flick in a book form, which I don't know if it's just me, but I feel like there have not been many good chick flicks to come out in the last few years. So this filled the gap for me. It was cute, it was relatively clean, and which I appreciated, and I just thought it was a cute story, so I enjoyed that one. Then I listened to The Mother-in-Law by Sally Hepworth, and this was kind of like a family drama / mystery book. So the book opens and you find out that the main character's mother-in-law has died, and then the rest of the book is pretty much flashbacks between her and her mother-in-law and their relationship, and we learn a little bit more about the mother-in-law and her life and how the different ways that they might have misunderstood each other. So the mystery element was, just okay. It wasn't like it wasn't mind-boggling or anything like that. But what I liked about the book was just the relationship between her and her mother-in-law, and how you kind of got to see how they were misunderstanding each other. It made you think about maybe your own mother-in-law relationships or things like that, but my mother-in-law is great. I never feel like we have misunderstandings, but just in general, if that makes sense. Okay, next I read or listened to The River by Peter Heller, and this book, I think on Anne Bogle, if any of you follow Modern Mrs. Darcy or listen to her podcast, she puts out a summer reading guide every summer, and this was like her top pick on her summer reading guide. She said it was one of her best books of the year so far, and I don't know, I just thought it was okay. It was interesting. The story was about a couple of friends who go on like a canoeing trip in Canada, and then there's a wildfire, and then a guy shows up and he's lost his wife, and it's just kind of a snowball effect from there of things going wrong. So the story itself was pretty interesting. It kept me listening to it, but and I felt the language was really nice to listen to. I've heard from some reading friends that to read it's not so pleasant because there are a lot of run-on sentences, and she posted an example on Instagram and it was really terrible. So I'm not sure I would have enjoyed it if I had read it. Listening to it was a good experience, but I don't know, it didn't blow me away. I was expecting a lot, and it didn't really meet my high expectations. But it was enjoyable enough. I liked it well enough, I suppose. Then I finally finished. I've been reading this one for a couple months, but I keep having to return to the library and then get back. You know how that goes. But I finished Them, Why We Hate Each Other and How to Heal by Ben Sasse. Ben Sasse is a U.S. senator, and I've read most of one of his other books called The Vanishing American Adult, and that was a really interesting book. So I was really interested to read this one, and it's basically just about just loneliness, the problem of loneliness in America, why we're lonely, how things like really partisan media and things like that are contributing to loneliness, and then how to kind of maybe not so much how, but just encouragement to unite as Americans again and realize the things that we have in common and connect with our neighbors and things like that. So gave me a lot to think about, really interesting data and stuff that he shared in it. I think it's definitely worth a read, whether you are more liberal or more conservative or whatever. Like there was a lot of just good things to think about in the book. So I definitely recommend that. And then I did read The Clockmaker's Daughter, which if you watched my to be read video from the beginning of June, this was on that. So I finished something on my TBR, woohoo, that I'm not good at reading my TBR, so that was nice. But anyway, I finished The Clockmaker's Daughter, and it was definitely not my favorite Kate Morton book that I've ever read. I've enjoyed the other couple books I've read from her much better. This one had a few problems to me. One was one of the main narrators was like a ghost, and there was a lot of other occultic references kind of mixed in, which I really don't enjoy reading about. I'm a Christian. I take that stuff really seriously, and think it can lead into some bad things. So I don't really like when it's treated casually or put in as kind of like a mysterious element in books, just because I take that seriously. But it wasn't the only reason I didn't like it. The main thing was I felt like there was just so many characters. I really didn't have time to really get invested in any of the characters. I didn't have time to really start to care about what happened to them. I think if she had eliminated like maybe just a couple of the storylines, she would have had more time to invest in some of the characters, and I would have formed more of a connection with them, if that makes sense. So it was just okay. I give it like 2 stars or something like that on Goodreads. So it was not my favorite. I don't know. That's all I have to say about that. Then I did read Hope and Other Punchlines by Julie Buxbaum. This was my first book from her. I think I'm really not a YA kind of person. Like, I wasn't blown away by the book. I respected what the author was trying to do. I think she was trying to introduce the tragedy of 9/11 to a younger generation that doesn't have any personal experience with it, which isn't that weird. Like, I feel like I was really pretty young when 9/11 happened. So it's weird to think now that there's a whole group of kids who, it's just part of history books to them. So I really respect what she was trying to do there as far as bringing it closer to home and letting, kind of introducing what a hardship that was for the country to a younger generation. There was some other content issues I had with it. I posted more details of that on Goodreads. But I guess the thing I didn't love about this book was I felt that the 2 main characters, I didn't really buy that they were good for each other. It was kind of like, there's a romance element to the book. But I just wasn't invested in them together as a couple. I just didn't really feel like they were, I don't know, like, I guess YA, like, teenage romances probably aren't going to last anyway, right? So maybe it shouldn't matter, but I wasn't invested in their relationship. That was only part of the story. I liked some of the other parts she did, but it was okay. Next one I read was How Not to Die Alone by Richard Roeper. There was a lot of cussing in this book, so be prepared to go into it for that. But besides that, I really enjoyed this one. I really liked how, the basic premise of the book, a guy gets a job basically going in and cleaning out people's houses after they die and their relations can't be found. He goes through their possessions to try to find out who to call for the funeral, basically. It's part of his job. But when he's hired for the job, he's asked a lot of questions about his family, so he ends up kind of making up a family on accident almost. It kind of starts out as an accident, but then he develops it into this whole story and develops all his family members and things like that till he has a whole fake family worked out. But then a coworker starts who he kind of is interested in, and so he has to kind of figure out how to, fix this now that he's got this whole fake family deal, but also someone he's kind of interested in now. So that was like really kind of an interesting premise to me. I listened to the audio on this, and the audio was really well done. I really liked because the main character is really into jazz music and specifically Ella Fitzgerald's music. So there was some of her songs mentioned through the whole book, and I actually started a playlist on Spotify just with the songs that were mentioned. So that was just fun. Like, I thought that was just a fun element to the book. But something I didn't like about the book is that he kind of gets a little bit into this relationship with this woman when technically she's still married and he has a fake family. So I didn't love that because even though it was like she was in the process kind of getting a divorce from her husband, sort of, but it was still cheating, and especially, you know, in theory cheating with his supposedly fake family. So that I just got a little iffy for that sort of thing, like morally speaking. But as far as his job, I thought that aspect of the book was really interesting. I really liked how his character just treated the people who had died with such respect, and it was really like valuing of their lives and things like that, which I really appreciated. I've read other books that are kind of similar premises, or is that how you say premises, or is there a plural of premise that I'm not aware of? They're similar in their plots, but sometimes it's treated a little, there's some dark humor and it's maybe treated a little bit disrespectfully, and I just not really agree, like big fan of discounting people's lives or treating that cavalierly. So I really liked that there was a lot of respect shown for the people who had died in this book, if that makes sense. I feel like I'm rambling, I'm sorry. Okay, continuing on. Next one I read or listened to, I listened to a lot of audiobooks this month, was Daisy Jones and the Six. And there's been a lot of hype around this book, a lot. So I just kind of got curious and picked it up. And honestly, probably would not have even finished it. I got about halfway through and I was just getting so tired of, like, you know, the casual sex and the drugs. And, you know, it's based on, the story's about a 70s rock band, so you can imagine there's a lot of that going on, I guess. But I was getting really weary of it, and I didn't really want to finish it, but I thought, I'm just going to persevere because I'm already halfway through this, and whatever, I'll just finish it. But I finished it, and I actually really enjoyed the ending. I thought in the end, the story really affirmed families and, ironically, faithfulness to your wife and things like that. It really elevated that kind of value system, and the hero of the book was, well, maybe I shouldn't say that. I won't say that, but there was a surprising hero of the book to me at the end. Like, one of the characters came across as a hero at the end that I was not expecting, but she was kind of elevated in her role in everybody's lives at the end of the book, and I just found that really uplifting. So I mean, it's not what I'm gonna say, go out and read it or whatever, because there was a lot of, like, immorality, let's just say that, like a lot of drug use, just a lot of stuff like that. But the overall message of it, I just thought was really good. So I liked that. And then, okay, I've got three more. Okay, I also read Only Ever Her by Marybeth Mayhew Whalen. It's a hard one. I really enjoyed this book. I read one other book by her, and it was too dark for me. I just didn't like the ending, and I didn't like how it went. But this one, it was still a little bit dark. I think her books kind of deal with, like, the darker side of small towns, so to speak. So I wasn't really expecting this one to turn out all happy, hunky-dory at the end necessarily. And maybe that's why I enjoyed it more. But the story was about a girl whose mother was killed when she was young, and then she's about to get married, but then she disappears, and so you don't really know what happened to her. And the story is kind of figuring out, some of the characters figuring out what might have happened to her, and that sort of thing. So it wasn't, I wouldn't call this an uplifting book. The ending wasn't, like, happy per se, but you did kind of get the sense that the characters were all going to be okay, and I do like that. So yeah, I found it interesting. There was some infidelity and other content things in here too that I also make note of on my Goodreads, just because I know a lot of people like to know what they're getting into when they start a book. So if you want all those details, you can check out the reviews for all these on Goodreads. Okay, next I read Inheritance, a memoir of genealogy, paternity, and the title's getting cut off. It's by Dani Shapiro. So I don't know if I should give away too much or not. I feel like from the people I've heard who have talked about this book, some people think you should go into it with no knowledge, but I'm just going to go ahead and tell you what it's about. So she basically does a DNA test for, like, Ancestry.com or something like that, and finds out that her biological father is not actually, or her father is not actually her biological father. So then she has this whole identity crisis, basically trying to figure out who she is, who her father is, you know, if her parents have been lying to her this whole time, or if somehow they didn't know. So it's really was an interesting story. I do feel that it got redundant by the end. I just thought by the end of the book, I was kind of like, okay, I'm kind of done reading this now, just because I feel like a lot of her musings at that point were just kind of repeats of her earlier musings. So I got a little weary of it at the end, but overall the story of it was interesting. Yeah, interesting to think about if that happened to you, if you figured out that, you weren't related to your family like you thought you were. So that was interesting. Okay, last one I finished in June, which was definitely a good one, was None Like Him, 10 Ways God is Different from Us by Jen Wilkin. And I read a different book by Jen Wilkin a while back. This one is about, well, the subtitle kind of tells you, but just about different characteristics of God that are not like us, because there's some characteristics of God that we can emulate, and then some, and that, we should emulate and try to do, like being loving and etc. But then there's some characteristics that God has that are just exclusive to him. So things like his omnipotence, omniscience, sovereignty, things like that. So each chapter goes over a different characteristic, and then, what I really thought was of value in this book was not just that it's a great theological primer, but also that she kind of points out different areas where we may try to emulate these characteristics of God or recreate them in our own lives when they really belong to God alone, and we need to trust him in those areas. So something like omniscience, like trying to know everything or have everything, like all the information at our fingertips, sometimes can become an idolatrous sort of thing, because we are not meant to know everything. God's the only one who can know everything, right? So that's just an example, but each one of the characteristics she kind of went over a way that it can be misused in a sinful way by humans, and that gave me a lot to think about and was really helpful. And I also love that she had verses for continued study and questions to think about at the end of each chapter. I took notes as I was listening to the end of the chapters, because I wanted to go back and look up the verses and things like that. So it ended up being a really great book, kind of for a study for my personal quiet time too, because I could look into some of the characteristics of God a little bit more. So it was a great book if you want something to kind of go through in addition to your regular Bible time each day. I think this is a good resource, and I really enjoyed it. And it was interesting too. It was not written in any sort of dry way. I know a lot of people who are not used to theological books would probably get a lot out of this one, just because it was written in a really interesting way, if that makes sense. Okay, that's it. That's all I've got for my June wrap up, and I'm gonna try to do a July TBR. How many books did I read off of my June TBR? 1, 2, 3, 4. I just read 4 books off of my June TBR, and I think I had 6 to 8 or something on it. So it wasn't great, but I did get through half the books, and I think having them in my TBR actually helped me want to read them. So I think I'll try to do a July TBR. But anyway, hope you're all having a good summer and are having good reading months, and I'm hoping to continue my reading streak in July, because I finished a lot of books in June. But anyway, talk to you soon. Bye.